The dust cloud on the horizon was the first sign that someone was coming to the Ramirez ranch. An 8-year-old Ellie Ramirez spotted it from the porch where she'd been shucking corn for supper. The year was 1875, and visitors to their remote homestead outside Taylor, Arizona territory were rare enough to be a cause for celebration or concern. "Pa," Ellie called out, shielding her eyes from the harsh midday sun. "Someone's coming." Frank Ramirez emerged from the barn, wiping his calloused hands on a rag. At 32, he was still a handsome man, despite the lines etched prematurely around his eyes, reminders of 3 hard years as a widower raising 2 children alone. He squinted at the approaching wagon, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver holstered at his hip. "Get your brother and wait inside," he said, his voice carrying the gruff edge it had developed since Martha's passing. Ellie nodded but hesitated. "Pa, what if it's someone nice?" Frank's expression softened slightly. "Then, we'll invite them for supper. Now go on." As the wagon drew closer, Frank could make out a solitary figure, a woman in a pale blue dress, her bonnet protecting her face from the relentless Arizona sun. The wagon itself was modest but well-maintained, loaded with crates and covered with canvas in the back. It wasn't the typical transport of trouble, but Frank had learned the hard way that danger came in all forms in the territory. He waited, one hand resting casually near his holster, as the wagon pulled up to the front of the ranch house. "Good afternoon," called a melodious voice that caught Frank off guard with its warmth. "I hope I'm not intruding." The woman who climbed down from the wagon took Frank's breath away. She was tall and willowy, with auburn hair peeking out from beneath her bonnet and the most startling green eyes he'd ever seen. Her skin was fair but kissed by the sun, suggesting she was no stranger to outdoor work. "No intrusion, madam," Frank managed, suddenly conscious of his work-worn clothes and the 3-day stubble on his face. "What brings you out this way?" "My name is Olivia Gardner," she said with a smile that lit up her entire face. "I've recently settled on the old Miller place about 5 miles east. I'm making rounds to introduce myself to neighbors and—" She gestured to the wagon. "I'm selling eggs and preserves from my farm." Before Frank could respond, the front door of the ranch house burst open. His 6-year-old son, James, shot out like a bullet from a gun, with Ellie following close behind. "Pa, can we see?" James asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "I told you two to stay inside," Frank said sternly, but there was no real anger in his voice. James ignored the gentle reprimand, his attention fully captured by the visitor. He approached the wagon cautiously, then, seeing the crates, ran straight to Olivia. Before Frank could stop him, the boy had wrapped his small hands in the fabric of her skirt, peering up at her with unabashed curiosity. "Are you an angel?" James asked solemnly. "Ma's an angel now. Pa says so." Frank felt heat rise to his face. "James, that's no way to greet a lady. Let go of Miss Gardner's skirt this instant." But Ellie had joined her brother, similarly enthralled by the visitor. And now both children clung to Olivia's skirt, as if she might disappear if they let go. To Frank's surprise, Olivia Gardner laughed a sound like water over stones in a creek, and knelt down to the children's level, seemingly unbothered by the dust that would surely soil her dress. "I'm no angel, young man," she said kindly to James. "Just a neighbor with too many chickens that lay too many eggs." She glanced up at Frank, her eyes twinkling. "And who might you two be?" "I'm James Ramirez," the boy announced proudly. "I'm 6. This is my sister Ellie. She's 8 and bossy." "Am not," Ellie protested, but she was smiling. "Miss Gardner, do you have children too?" A shadow passed briefly over Olivia's face, so quickly Frank almost missed it. "No, I don't," she said softly. "It's just me and my chickens and my vegetable garden." Frank finally found his voice again. "Children, give Miss Gardner some space. I apologize for their behavior, madam. They don't see many visitors, especially—" He trailed off. "Women?" Olivia supplied with a knowing smile. "Please, don't apologize. They're delightful." She straightened up, though the children still remained close. "And please, call me Olivia." "Frank Ramirez," he offered in return, finally stepping forward to offer his hand. When she took it, he was surprised by the strength in her grip and the calluses that matched his own. This was a woman who worked hard. "Would you like to see my eggs, Mr. Ramirez?" she asked, and then blushed slightly at how the question sounded. I mean, I have several dozen fresh ones, and some preserves as well, blackberry and peach from my orchard. We ain't had fresh eggs in forever, Pa, Ellie exclaimed. Can we get some, please? Frank hesitated. The ranch was getting by, but luxuries were few and far between since Martha died. Still, the hope in his children's eyes and something about Olivia Gardner's kind smile made it impossible to refuse. We'd be happy to buy some eggs, Miss Gardner, Olivia, he corrected himself, and perhaps some preserves too, if your price is fair. I believe in neighbors helping neighbors, Mr. Ramirez. My price is always fair. She moved to the back of the wagon and unveiled several crates of neatly packed eggs and jars of preserves. The Miller place came with fruit trees that were sorely neglected. This is their first good harvest in years, I suspect. As Olivia showed the children how carefully she had packed the eggs, Frank found himself watching her with unexpected interest. It had been 3 long years since Martha's fever took her, leaving him with a baby and a toddler to raise alone. 3 years during which his world had shrunk to the boundaries of the ranch and his responsibilities as a father. He had not given a thought to another woman in all that time, yet something about Olivia Gardner stirred feelings he had long buried. Pa says you can stay for supper, James suddenly announced, tugging at Olivia's skirt again. Frank's eyes widened. James, I said no such thing. Olivia laughed. It's quite all right, Mr. Ramirez. I should be getting back before dark anyway. We're having corn and beans, Ellie said, disappointment evident in her voice. It's not special, but Pa makes it good. Frank watched as Olivia knelt again to speak directly to his daughter. I'm sure your pa makes wonderful corn and beans, but I really should head home. It's a long ride back to the Miller place, Frank heard himself saying, and it would be nice to have eggs for breakfast tomorrow. We'd be honored if you join us for a simple supper, Miss Gardner, to welcome you to the area. The smile that lit up Olivia's face made something flutter in Frank's chest, a sensation he'd almost forgotten. In that case, I accept your invitation, Mr. Ramirez, and I insist on helping with the preparations. Before Frank could protest, Olivia was being led by both hands toward the ranch house, his children chattering excitedly on either side of her. He stood for a moment, watching them go, wondering what had just happened to the quiet routine of his carefully ordered world. Inside the modest ranch house, Olivia immediately noticed the signs of a home missing a woman's touch. Everything was clean, but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, a few chairs, and a small sofa facing the fireplace. There were no decorative touches, no cushions or curtains to soften the hard edges. Your home is lovely, she said diplomatically, setting down the basket of eggs and preserves she'd insisted on contributing to dinner. Frank gave her a knowing look. You're too kind, but I know it's plain. Martha had plans to make it nicer before she went to heaven, James finished matter-of-factly. Olivia's heart ached for these children who spoke of their mother's death with such innocent acceptance. Well, she said brightly, shall we get supper started? I make excellent cornbread, if you have the makings. Frank nodded. We do. The children have been shucking corn all morning. Can I help you, Miss Olivia? Ellie asked eagerly. I'd be delighted to have such a capable assistant, Olivia replied, already rolling up her sleeves. The kitchen soon filled with the comforting aroma of cornbread baking and beans simmering. Frank watched in amazement as Olivia moved about his kitchen with natural ease, finding utensils and ingredients as if she'd lived there for years. The children orbited around her like moons around a planet, desperate to help with any task she would allow them. Miss Olivia says she has a horse named Star, James informed his father importantly as he set the table, and 12 chickens and a cow named Buttercup. Is that so? Frank replied, smiling despite himself. She says I can come see the baby chicks sometime if you say it's all right, Ellie added. Can we, Pa? Please? Frank met Olivia's eyes across the room. That's very kind of Miss Gardner, but we wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Olivia assured him. The Miller place is lonely sometimes. I'd welcome the company. The confession seemed to slip out unintentionally, and Frank saw a flash of vulnerability in her eyes before she turned back to the stove. He wondered about her story. What had brought a woman like Olivia Gardner to stake a claim alone in the Arizona territory? Supper was the liveliest affair the Ramirez Ranch had seen in years. The children peppered Olivia with questions about her farm, her journey west, her favorite foods, and 100 other topics. To Frank's surprise, she answered each one patiently, drawing out stories from the children in return. "How long have you been at the Miller place?" Frank asked during a rare lull in the conversation. "Just 3 months," Olivia replied. "I came west from Boston after my father passed away. He left me just enough to buy the small farm and start over." "All by yourself?" Frank couldn't hide his surprise. "That's mighty brave." A shadow crossed Olivia's face. "Sometimes circumstances don't leave much choice in the matter of bravery, Mr. Ramirez." Before he could ask what she meant, James tugged at her sleeve. "Will you read us a story before you go, Miss Olivia?" Pa tries, but he's not very good at the voices. Frank felt his cheeks warm. "James, Miss Gardner needs to head home before dark." "Actually?" Olivia glanced out the window at the setting sun. "I fear I've stayed too long already. It would be foolhardy to travel back now. The coyotes will be out, and the trail is treacherous in darkness." She looked at Frank uncertainly. "Is there somewhere in town I might find lodging for the night?" Frank shook his head. "Taylor's a good hour's ride from here, and the only boarding house is usually full with miners." He hesitated, weighing propriety against practicality. "We have a small spare room. It's simple, but clean. You'd be welcome to stay." The relief in Olivia's eyes was evident. "I wouldn't want to impose—" "It's settled then," Frank said firmly. "You'll stay the night and head back in the morning." "Story time!" James cheered, and even Frank had to laugh at his son's single-mindedness. That evening, as the Arizona sky turned to a canvas of deep purples and brilliant stars, Frank Ramirez stood in the doorway of his children's bedroom watching as Olivia Gardner sat between their beds, a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe in her hands. Her voice rose and fell with the adventure of the story, different for each character, just as James had hoped. Both children fought sleep valiantly, determined to hear as much as possible, but eventually surrendered. When Olivia noticed they were both asleep, she gently closed the book and rose, turning to find Frank watching her. "They're wonderful children," she said softly as she joined him in the hallway, carefully pulling the door nearly closed behind her. "They are," Frank agreed, suddenly acutely aware of how close she was in the narrow space. "They haven't taken to anyone like this since their mother died." Olivia's eyes were sympathetic in the dim light of the oil lamp. "How long has it been?" 3 years next month. Childbed fever, after James." Frank rarely spoke of it, but somehow the words came easily with Olivia. She held on for 2 weeks, but in the end... He shook his head. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this." "I don't mind," Olivia said gently. "Sometimes it helps to speak of those we've lost." She hesitated, then added, "I lost my husband 5 years ago. Influenza took him in just 3 days." Frank looked at her with new understanding. "I'm sorry." They stood in silence for a moment, connected by the shared experience of grief that few could truly comprehend. "Would you like some coffee?" Frank offered finally. "Or I have a small measure of whiskey if you prefer." Olivia smiled. "Coffee would be lovely. Then I should turn in. Morning comes early on a farm." They sat at the kitchen table, coffee mugs warming their hands, and talked as the night deepened around the small ranch house. Frank found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years about his journey west from Texas after the war, his dreams for the ranch, his struggles and small triumphs as a widowed father. In turn, Olivia spoke of her life in Boston as a schoolteacher, her brief happy marriage cut short by disease, and her decision to use her inheritance to start anew where land was cheap and memories weren't waiting around every corner. "Weren't you afraid?" Frank asked. "Coming all this way alone?" Olivia considered the question. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But staying felt worse somehow. Everyone looked at me with such pity. Here, no one knows my story unless I choose to tell it." Frank nodded in understanding. "The children ask about their mother sometimes. It's getting harder to answer as they grow older. Especially Ellie, she remembers bits and pieces, but not enough. They need a woman in their lives," Olivia said carefully. "A role model, especially for Ellie. Are you volunteering, Miss Gardner?" The words slipped out before Frank could stop them, and he immediately felt heat rise to his face. I apologize. That was presumptuous. To his surprise, Olivia laughed softly. I wouldn't mind seeing more of you and the children, Mr. Ramirez, if that's what you're asking. Their eyes met across the table, and Frank felt something shift between them, possibility opening like a flower at dawn. I believe it is, he said quietly. Morning came with the crowing of a distant rooster and the soft golden light of an Arizona sunrise. Olivia woke in the spare room, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous day came flooding back. She smoothed her dress as best she could and pinned her hair up neatly before venturing out. She found Frank already up, stoking the fire in the kitchen stove. He turned when he heard her, and the smile that spread across his face made her heart skip. Good morning, he said. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in months, she admitted. Thank you for your hospitality. Before he could respond, the patter of small feet announced the arrival of James and Ellie, both still in their nightclothes, hair tousled from sleep. Miss Olivia, you're still here, James exclaimed joyfully, immediately attaching himself to her skirt again. I told you she would be, Ellie said with the superior air of an older sister, though she too came to stand close to Olivia. Good morning, children, Olivia greeted them warmly. Shall we make your father some breakfast with those eggs I brought? The morning passed in a flurry of domestic activity that felt strangely natural to all involved. Olivia showed Ellie how to crack eggs without getting shells in the pan, while James set the table with exaggerated care. Frank watched them, a curious lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. After breakfast, Olivia knew she couldn't delay her departure any longer. She had animals to tend and work waiting at her own farm. Frank helped her load the wagon while the children watched forlornly from the porch. Thank you again for everything, Olivia said, as she prepared to climb up to the seat. The meal, the company, the lodging. Frank hesitated, then took her hand. When might we see you again? The children would be mighty disappointed if this was a one-time visit. Just the children? Olivia asked softly, her eyes meeting his. Frank's smile was slow but genuine. No, not just the children. I make my rounds with eggs every Wednesday, she offered, but I could perhaps stop by on Sunday after church as well, if that would be welcome. More than welcome, Frank assured her. He hesitated, then added, In fact, we'd be honored if you'd join us for Sunday dinner this week. I'm not much of a cook, as you've seen, but I could manage a roast. Olivia's face lit up. I'd like that very much. As promised, Olivia returned the following Sunday, her wagon laden with fresh bread she'd baked that morning, and a small pot of honey from her beehives. The children spotted her approaching and ran down the drive to meet her, their Sunday best already smudged with dust from play. Miss Olivia! Miss Olivia! They chorused, racing alongside her wagon. Frank emerged from the house, freshly shaved and wearing his good shirt, a sight that made Olivia catch her breath. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist, perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Welcome back, he said, his voice warm. You've been sorely missed around here. Has it only been 4 days? Olivia replied with a smile. It feels longer somehow. The Sunday dinner was a grand affair by Ramirez Ranch standards. Frank had indeed managed a roast, and Olivia's fresh bread and honey made the meal feel like a feast. After eating, they sat on the porch while the children played in the yard, talking as easily as if they'd known each other for years instead of days. I should be going, Olivia said reluctantly as the afternoon waned. My animals will need tending. When will you come back? James asked anxiously, abandoning his game to rush to her side. Olivia looked to Frank, a question in her eyes. Miss Gardner will be back on Wednesday with eggs, Frank told his son, and perhaps she might join us for Sunday dinner again next week, if she's not too busy. Every Sunday? Ellie asked hopefully. Frank and Olivia exchanged glances, both recognizing the dangerous territory they were entering. The children were becoming attached, and if they were honest with themselves, so were they. We'll see, Olivia said diplomatically. I would certainly like to. That Wednesday, and each Wednesday after, Olivia arrived with eggs and often other goods from her farm. Frank always insisted she stay for at least a cup of coffee, and soon those visits extended to shared meals and long conversations that stretched into the evening. Some nights, when it grew too late for her to safely return home, she would stay in the spare room, much to the children's delight. On Sundays, she joined them for dinner without fail, sometimes attending the small church in Taylor with them first. The people of the town noticed the handsome widower and his children growing close to the independent woman who'd taken over the Miller place, and gossip inevitably followed. But neither Frank nor Olivia paid it much mind. As spring turned to summer, Olivia taught Ellie to make simple dolls from corn husks and showed James how to collect honey safely from her hives. Frank helped her mend her barn roof and dug a new well closer to her house. Their lives began to intertwine in 100 small ways, creating a pattern that felt increasingly permanent. One evening in late July, after the children were asleep, Frank and Olivia sat on the porch swing, watching heat lightning play across the distant mountains. The air was thick with the scent of sage and the promise of rain. "I've been thinking," Frank said after a comfortable silence, "the children and I could come help you with your harvest next month. It's too much work for one person." Olivia smiled. "I'd welcome the help, and I could assist with your cattle roundup in the fall. I'm not much of a rider, but I can cook for the hands." Frank took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Olivia, I hope you know that you've become important to us, to all of us." "And you to me," she admitted softly. "More than I expected when I first came up your drive with eggs to sell." "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Martha died," Frank said, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought that part of my life was over." Olivia's heart raced. "What way, Frank?" He turned to face her fully, his eyes serious in the dimming light. "Like I've found something precious I didn't even know I was looking for. Like my heart recognizes something in you it's been waiting for." He shook his head. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Olivia, but I care for you deeply." "I care for you too," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "And for your children. More than I can say." Frank leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Olivia met him halfway, their lips connecting in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His hand came up to cup her cheek gently, and she leaned into his touch, savoring the warmth and strength she felt there. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing quickly, eyes wide with the significance of what had just happened. "I should go," Olivia said, though she made no move to rise from the swing. "Stay," Frank said simply. "Not just tonight. Stay with us, Olivia." She looked at him in surprise. "Frank, are you asking—" "I'm asking you to marry me," he said firmly. "I know it hasn't been long, but when something feels this right, why wait? The children adore you, and He took a deep breath. "I love you, Olivia Gardner. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have us." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll have you, all of you. I love you too, Frank, and I love Ellie and James as if they were my own." Their second kiss sealed the promise, tender and full of hope for the future they would build together. The wedding took place in early September, a small affair at the church in Taylor, with just a few neighbors and friends in attendance. Ellie served as flower girl, proudly scattering petals down the aisle, while James carried the rings on a small cushion, his face solemn with the importance of his task. Frank stood at the altar, barely able to believe his good fortune, as Olivia walked toward him, radiant in a simple cream dress with wildflowers in her hair. Judge Thompson, who doubled as the town's minister, conducted the ceremony with a broad smile, having watched their courtship with approval from the beginning. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," he declared at last. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Ramirez." As Frank kissed Olivia to the cheers of those gathered, he felt a tugging at his leg. Looking down, he found James and Ellie, both beaming up at them. "Is Miss Olivia our ma now?" James asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Laughter rippled through the small church as Olivia knelt down in her wedding dress. "I would be honored to be your ma if you'll have me," she said seriously. "We've been having you," Ellie said practically, "but now it's official." The decision to combine their lives at the Ramirez Ranch rather than Olivia's smaller farm was a practical one. The ranch had more land, better water, and was already set up for the growing family. Over the following weeks, they moved Olivia's possessions, animals, and even some of her fruit trees to their new shared home. The spare room where Olivia had first stayed became a sewing room and library, while she took her place in the main bedroom with Frank. Under her care, The ranch house slowly transformed, becoming the warm and comfortable home Martha had once envisioned. Curtains appeared at the windows, cushions softened the chairs, and flowers from Olivia's garden brightened every room. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in late October. The Ramirez family gathered around the fireplace each evening, Olivia often reading aloud, while Frank carved wooden toys for the children or mended harnesses. They were simple evenings, but filled with a contentment none of them had expected to find again. In the spring, as the land renewed itself, Olivia shared news that brought fresh joy to the ranch. She was expecting a child of her own. "A baby brother," James exclaimed when they told the children. "I just know it's going to be a boy." "It might be a sister," Ellie reminded him, though she looked equally thrilled at the prospect. "Brother or sister, this baby is very lucky," Frank said, his arm around Olivia's waist. "To be born into so much love." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months, though Frank couldn't help but worry, memories of Martha's difficult delivery and subsequent illness haunting his dreams. Olivia understood his fears and did her best to reassure him, taking extra care with her health and insisting they hire the new doctor and tailor to attend the birth when the time came. On a crisp November morning, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Olivia gave birth to a robust baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Thomas after Olivia's father and Franklin for his own. As Olivia nursed their son in the bedroom she and Frank shared, Ellie and James peeked around the doorframe, eager for their first glimpse of their new brother. "Come in," Olivia invited with a tired smile. "Come meet Thomas." The children approached cautiously, their eyes wide with wonder. "He's so tiny," Ellie whispered. "But he'll grow," Frank assured her, his voice thick with emotion as he watched his family, the one he'd had and the one he'd found, now merged into something greater than he could have imagined. James reached out a tentative finger to touch the baby's tiny fist. To everyone's delight, Thomas grabbed hold and wouldn't let go. "He's strong," James said proudly, "like Pa." "And determined," Olivia added with a laugh, "like his brother and sister." Frank sat carefully on the edge of the bed, gathering Ellie and James close with one arm, while his other hand rested gently on Olivia's shoulder. The circle of their family felt complete in that moment, healed from past sorrows and open to the joy of their shared future. "I never expected this," Frank said softly, looking from the children to his wife and new son. "When you drove up that day with your wagon full of eggs." "And they clung to my skirt before you could even speak," Olivia finished with a smile, remembering. "Best day of my life," Frank declared, leaning forward to kiss her gently. "Of our lives," Olivia corrected, including all of them in the circle of her love. Outside the window of the ranch house, the Arizona sun shone down on fields that would soon be planted for another season's growth. Inside, the Ramirez family began a new chapter in their story, one built on second chances, unexpected love, and the simple miracle of finding home in each other's hearts.